Hello, dear friends and adventurers. It's Rob, the D&D wannabe, here with some exciting news. This podcast is now made possible in partnership with our good friends at Misty Mountain Gaming. Veteran-owned and operated, Misty Mountain is one of the largest dice companies in the world. They offer the widest selection of metal, gemstone, and glass dice combined. For yourself, that special role player in your life, or your favorite podcast hosts. Just saying. Look for their booth at your next local comic, anime, or gaming convention, or find their products at mistymountaingaming.com. Okay, on with the show.
Ho, 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 it's magic, you know. Never believe it's not so. It's magic, you know. Talking about it on our show.
Welcome once again to another episode, friends and adventurers, of this Bardic Twinspiration. Starring, if starring is what we're actually doing, probably better termed hosted, by me, D&D wannabe, Rob, and my brother,
Steven, the obvious star of this show who does not make any ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's right, I bring everything to this show except the actual knowledge of the game, and that's why I permit you to be on it with me.
And I am most grateful, Master. It is so kind of you, so generous.
All right, what are we talking about today, Rob?
Magic. Actually that, yes. We're talking about magic.
If only we hadn't cut that catchy song from the intro, then they would have had some sort of clue as to what we were talking about.
Yes, we cut it. It won't appear at any point of this episode.
Definitely going to be at either the beginning or the end of this episode.
I wonder if anyone hasn't caught on to the fact that we put stuff at the end of the episodes yet.
It's possible. It'll either be so great that it needs to be at the beginning, or it'll be so bad that it deserves to be at the end. At any rate, yes, we will be discussing magic this evening. Now, just like in our Pantheon episode, the way that we are describing here is not going to be the only way that you can design a magic system in D&D 5e. A DM who designs his own homebrew campaign setting can set up magic absolutely however he wants, and it will be implemented in a manner of his choosing.
Or her.
Or her. If your DM says that the magic in their campaign all entirely comes from the stars, and that all those stars are the scales of the primordial dragon, and that the world is made from their bones, then so be it.
Oh, that sounds pretty cool, actually.
It's actually not that bad. I've definitely heard worse. But what we are primarily going to be discussing is how magic works in the Forgotten Realms, and we may make some suggestions here or there on how you can implement things differently. Lord knows there's a lot of stuff that I would. And I may not be able to bite my tongue on all of that.
I hope not.
But this will cover some baseline expectations that you can have for any magic system in D&D 5e, some unavoidable facts that are in the player's handbook that you would have to explicitly write around or explicitly circumvent in order to do so.
You drew the parallel to our Pantheon episode. Just like we said at the beginning of that episode, the Dungeon Master's Guide and all of the published materials from Wizards of the Coast make certain assumptions about your game. You may recall page 9 of the Dungeon Master's Guide. Some of the last words on that page are, "Magic is everywhere." This is a fantasy game, and while you can play Dungeons & Dragons without any magic, it is meant to be played. It was designed around magic being a pervasive, attainable, and equal parts controllable and wild force within your world.
I had thought about designing a campaign at one point that would have an incredibly low magic world, like the arcane equivalent of the Dark Ages, and that magic items and the knowledge of the arcane would have come from a previous age, and wizards, sorcerers, clerics, etc. would all be a fairly new concept in this age of the world. And I also had a thought about a world in which all casting was arcane until the party arrived, and the party would be composed of a divine soul sorcerer and a celestial pact warlock and a cleric and a paladin, as 4 people in the whole world who have the power of God and anime on their side.
The gods are back and they're not pleased.
Unless you set up a campaign like that, it will be with the assumption that magic is all around you, and it is some degree of accessible to the people who go out in search of it. So, with that in mind, let's talk about it.
So, magic in the Forgotten Realms is understood as the weave. That's a capital W weave, and it's not one that you can get at a beauty salon.
Though it may be why I dislike the term.
Yeah, it's not my favorite way of explaining magic either, but hey, it's what we're working with until we go out there and make our own.
We do like the stuff you write, Wizards of the Coast, we promise.
So, imagine that the weave represents the fabric of the world, literally a weaving of energy.
Literally the fabric of reality.
It is, as I said, it is pervasive. It's in everything, it's around everything, everything is made up of it, and that magic can be tweaked. Those threads can be plucked. And if you know how to do it, if you interact with it correctly, you can achieve desired magical effects, spells and miracles and the like. The weave was either, depending on how you look at it, was either created by or maybe is the god Mistral or goddess Mistral, one of the divines, who basically had the idea that magic is for everyone, and we shouldn't determine as gods who gets to do this and who gets to do that. You know what? If they're smart enough, they'll figure it out.
Right. It's basically the D&D arcane equivalent of Prometheus, right? Prometheus being the guy who brought fire to humans in Greek mythology.
I was thinking about it more as like heavy math. Just it's a bunch of science and equations and...
Oh, is Mistral the one who brought new math to the world?
Well, I would like them less if they were. Anyway, so that is kind of the basis of the assumption as you're reading through all the different classes and all the different spells, is that magic is out there, and if you are smart enough or clever enough or willful enough to affect it, then magic happens. Like, literally, you can make magic happen, baby.
So, the weave, as it is described in the Forgotten Realms, is an all-permeating, all-suffusing network of magical energy that exists across the planes.
Mm-hmm.
And is part of all life and all matter, and can be accessed by the people who have unlocked its mysteries. But there's a lot of different ways that a character could go about that.
Right. Characters, monsters, and the like. Some creatures out there in D&D land are just born with an ability to interact with it. A lot of monsters will have an innate spellcasting paragraph in their stat block that says, hey, these guys can just do these things. But often for player characters, it's harder than that. Some work is involved, some personal effort.
Right, and even certain races have some sort of innate spellcasting analog, such as the Tieflings and their Infernal Legacy. Aasimar have the Light Bearer trait, and the Gnomes have, what was that one called again?
Natural Illusionist.
Right, and that is because they have a certain legacy that is inherently tied to the weave.
But primarily, when we're thinking about spellcasting being done by player characters in Dungeons & Dragons, it's not a race thing, it's a class thing. Of the available classes out there, 6 of them are considered to be casting classes. That would be the Cleric, the Druid,
right,
the Wizard, Sorcerer, Warlock, and the Illustrious Bard.
So what we're going to start with is taking a look at all of these classes and how they interact with the weave. And
because they all do it a little bit differently.
So what we're going to start with is just a little discussion of these full casting classes and how exactly they get their magic power and how they interact with it in order to produce their trademark effects. When you think of casters in D&D 5e, what is the default? What's the first one that comes to mind?
That would be the wizard. Oh, absolutely it is, my dear boy.
Right. The wizard is the archetypical magic user in Dungeons and Dragons. It has its roots in the character of Gandalf, in its stereotypes of this wizened old man who has studied all his life and has a staff and a pointy hat and knows magic because he's been around long enough to learn a thing or two. You also have the archetype of Harry Potter, a educated person with a little wand and a book that tells them how the world works, and they read the spells, they say the magic words, and use the magic. And the D&D vision of the wizard is kind of somewhere between those two.
That's right. The wizard is your stereotypical hallmark arcane caster. They have devoted their lives and a rigorous amount of time and effort to study the secrets of the weave and how it works so that they can take those basic building blocks of arcane magic and reassemble them in new and inventive ways. This, by extension, would also apply to some of the half-caster types, like the Arcane Trickster Rogue or the Eldritch Knight Fighter. They are also going to be interacting with the weave in a very similar way, just to a lesser extent.
So when you say Arcane Caster, what exactly do you mean by Arcane Caster?
So arcane to me means that they are interacting with the latent magical energy that is around them. They are not drawing this from any higher power or any sort of deity, and they are not pulling this power from within. They are reaching out into the magic that suffuses the world around them and drawing it out and manipulating it to achieve the desired effect.
I think I can get behind that definition, as a matter of fact. Arcane casting, to me, generally implies interacting with, as you said, magic that's around you, drawing it in, manipulating it, and returning it in a new form. Most of the casting in 5th edition is arcane casting. In fact, it's much easier to define exceptions to that rule than it is to say which ones are arcane casters.
I also typically think of arcane casters as magicians who are imposing order upon the weave in order to do so through the use of mathematical symbols and glyphs, harnessing it through symbology or verse, like spoken word, written symbols. There's a lot of structure, there's a lot of order to how an arcane caster employs their magics.
Even when they are imposing that order on the world to serve chaos.
Right.
They are giving design to the chaos and then achieving a desired effect. Whatever effect the desired effect may have on the outside world.
Right. Their motivations can absolutely be chaotic, and the results can absolutely be chaotic, but the method by which they cast their magic comes from an understanding of the fundamentals of how the weave is structured and a very clear and defined way of manipulating that.
Right, and since wizards are specifically intelligence casters, they're in fact the only full-classed intelligence casters in the game, this means that they are figuring this out on an intellectual level. They have discovered the equations, the correct words, the correct gestures, the required components to manipulate the weave in the way that they want it manipulated. It has nothing to do with their force of will or of their devotion to certain ideals or entities. They're just that smart. They're arcane scientists. They figured it out and made it work.
And of course, we also have the literal fantasy equivalent of an arcane scientist in the Artificer, who employs a very similar method using just slightly different means.
Right. I think everything that we say about the wizard can apply broadly to the artificer, however you want to say that.
Yeah, I'm still working on it myself.
And because they are these geniuses, these professors in the ways of the weave, as their understanding increases, so too does their magical potential. They study hard and unlock that next level of spell slots. They study harder, and they can memorize more spells. And the smarter they are, more spells they can remember at a time. And it's all based upon rigorous dedication to their craft, a pursuit of knowledge and excellence in the studies of the arcane. There's nobody else involved. This is an individual pursuit for a wizard. Maybe they have someone mentoring them. Maybe they're standing on the shoulders of giants and learning from the greats of history. But that magic isn't coming from anywhere else. It's all about them and their skill.
And all of these things that we have mentioned so far are also true, notably, for the Bard class.
Ah, my favorite.
They also have a history with the weave and interact with it in very similar ways. There's a little bit of a different flavor, though, when you're approaching it from a bard's perspective. The Forgotten Realms has, in its creation mythos, a certain theme that I've noticed throughout various real-life religions and various fictitious religions, which is that the world was created by spoken word or by song.
Yeah, that is very pervasive throughout literature and mythology.
In the Bible, God created the world through word alone. In Tolkien's Arda, the world was created by Iluvatar leading the rest of the Aiur in song.
And in the Chronicles of Narnia, one of my favorite book series, Aslan sings into being the mountains and the hills and the animals and the beasts and the creatures that fill Narnia and its lands.
And just like in that, the bards of the Forgotten Realms believe that their world was also created by song. And a bard uses echoes of this song of creation to cast their magic. Every bard is essentially, at their core, a cover band for the gods. And they use their understanding of that song of creation, that inherent connection to the weave that they have unlocked, to perform very similar magic, just not as much using their head as, again, that innate connection that they have inside. But instead of using their knowledge of how the weave works, they instead use that connection within that they have gained through connecting with the weave.
I don't think you've read Robert Jordan's A Wheel of Time series.
I have not.
I'm only going through it myself for the first time. I waited way too long on that. Great world building in those books. But the Tinkers are this people in the books who believe that there is a lost song, and their culture and their customs all revolve around them searching for this lost song. And they believe that the world will be forever changed if they can find it again. And since I have been acquainted with the Tinkers, I've begun thinking of bards kind of in a similar vein. That they're spending their lives pursuing not just excellence in their performing arts, but in search of that lost lore, in search of more fragments of that song of creation. And as a bard continues in their levels, unlocking more spells and abilities and uses for their inspiration, they are stumbling upon or discovering more snippets of those all-important words and those all-important tunes that have the power to change the world, quite literally.
Right. Bards are inherently tied to song and story. If you go through the book, this is actually tied into that connection that they have with the weave. They are not a common troubadour who strums on their lutes and sings songs about the heroes from a bygone age. No, they are engaging in the story of the world that began with creation and that continues on throughout history and are consequently contributing to it by adding verses to the same song in the same way.
So, how that translates to their magic is, rather than having figured out these equations, these scientific principles on which magic is founded, they approach it more from an artistic perspective. And they will perform these pieces, affecting magic with a force of will and with their charisma.
Because that connection to the arcane is not an intellectual one, it is something that they feel.
Right. Bards vibe with magic, right? It is something that affects them personally and that they use to affect others personally. And it's all performance art for them.
The temptation was great to say, nah, bards fuck with magic.
But as we said, much like wizards, they have to pursue this art. They have to learn it. They have to go out there and experience or find new inspirations and new notes, phrases, and strains. And much like wizards, it's all up here. It's all
He pointed to his
them.
head.
They once they learn a spell, it's not going anywhere. Their magic is not conditional. It is based on, once again, on skill.
Exactly. They are very interconnected. The wizards, the artificers, the bards, and all of the various subclasses that dip their toes into the arcane pursuits. They all are based on either their intelligence, except for the bards, who are based on charisma, and they are all about permanently unlocking these secrets that they will carry with them for the rest of their life, and they will be able to use that knowledge to change the world.
Now, what if you took that relationship with magic that is so intimately personal, that's based on your effort and your skill,
Sure.
and threw all that away?
Okay. Well, you'd have nothing, right?
And just said, I deserve magical power because of how I live my life. That I am entirely devoted to this more powerful person who, by trickle-down economics, has now given me some of their magical power. And you get clerics. Clerics are not tied to the weave per se. They get their power vicariously from their divine patron, the god that they serve and to whom they have devoted their life.
Right. They are fundamentally different from wizards, who are unlocking the secrets of the universe by their rigorous study. Now, clerics, and of course also in this category, warlocks and paladins, are granted their powers by someone who already possesses them, just a lot more of them. And they are willing to trade some of this power to the player character in exchange for some level of service or devotion.
Right. Everybody wants somebody to do stuff for them. And if you have a bunch of magical power and not enough people doing stuff for you, you say, what if I could pay this person to do stuff for me in magical power? And maybe that's a bit more of a warlock way of doing things, but it broadly can apply to clerics too.
It's just the law of supply and demand. And it does apply, depending on what class you play, to everyone from Bahamut the Platinum Dragon down to an old night hag that lives on a cave by the seashore. Anyone who has a large amount of power and needs something done can go out there and find themselves a player character.
So, importantly, this differs from the bards and wizards and artificers of the world in that a cleric is never in charge of their own power wholly.
Holy.
Hey.
Hey.
Because it is granted by another entity, and that relationship is very conditional. Is I do work, I get paid. I live my life in devotion and service of my patron, I receive magic. And that relationship can change on a dime. If the cleric of peace ever straight up cold-blooded murders somebody, you can bet they will wake up in the morning without their clerical mojo.
If the Oath of Vengeance Paladin decides for some reason to forgive their sworn enemy and permit them to go about their business, their powers will change drastically.
And if the warlock does not sacrifice a human child on the night of the full moon every month,
Grim.
Your experience with your warlock patron may differ.
Yeah. Your mileage may vary depending on who your patron is.
And, sometimes I can see warlocks patrons who are pretty easygoing and just expect you to help them out when they really need something. And I can see warlock patrons who are much more manipulative and much more micromanagey, telling you to do this, that, and the other, every second of every day. And I never see gods as doing that. I see that as a warlocky bit of fine print.
Yeah, I really want to someday be a warlock of the elder god. Give me some unpronounceable symbols.
Yog-Sothoth?
Sure. I want to be the warlock of Yog-Sothoth, who the first demand that is made of me is to, hey, you see that rock right there in the middle of the road? Yeah, I'm going to need you to move that about 2 feet to the left.
And not ask why.
Yeah, no questions asked. This is what I need you to do right now, and I will give you all the powers that you need. Just move. Can you move that rock for me? I'm practically in a different dimension right now, and I can't do that on my own. And so the warlock moves that rock 2 feet over, which causes a cow who's walking down the road tomorrow to trip and fall and die. And that means that that cow never makes it to market. And that means that this family never buys it. And that means that this head of the family has to go out and hunt for food, which means that he's not there to defend the village when it's attacked. And that is the perfect villain origin story for the actual guy, for the champion that Yog-Sothoth has been waiting for. And if that rock doesn't get moved, then that's a century of planning that just won't get to come to pass, and maybe that's why you need a warlock.
That's some Sheogorath level crap right there.
Ooh yeah, Warlock of Sheogorath. That's a campaign. I feel like that's what Artagan should have been, except with much more hate of the theater.
So yes, clerics get their power from somebody else. It is conditional in that they must live their life a certain way to receive the power. Ditto for warlocks, ditto for paladins. And that relationship can be broken at any time. Now, druids are a little bit between the two because they are drawing in magic from around them. It's not coming from anybody else. They're drawing it out of the land itself, out of the natural chaos of the weave. And they are bringing it to bear to affect themselves and the world around them. But they still kind of have a lifestyle to perpetuate their affinity with the weave here. They believe that if they wield metal weapons or worked iron or wear metal shields or, in some cases eat meat, I don't think that's in the rules, but I've seen that in some campaigns that I've been in, that will interrupt their connection to the magic that they're able to wield. They have a relationship with nature, with the world around them, with the magic of the world, that is similar in a way to a clerical devotion to a deity.
Exactly. So it is, in a way, kind of an arcane sort of tradition, but in a very mysticism-esque sort of way. But it is predicated upon their lifestyle. They have to be devoted to something. But it is also based more upon a connection than a fundamental understanding of how these things work. So if I was going to be making a druid, it would be someone who is deeply and primally connected to the land and the magic that suffuses it. They might not exactly know how the weave is manipulated in order to produce the effects that they can use. They would in essence be asking nature, asking Gaia, asking the weave a favor, and they would be doing what they felt they were led to do by the weave in order to produce this effect.
Right, and that's kind of why druids fill their own slot in Dungeons and Dragons, right? You can lump bards and warlocks and wizards and sorcerers all under the broad category of arcane, and you can lump clerics and paladins into the holy category, or infernal, as your flavor may be. But druids get to be druidic. They get their own casting focus, they get their own set of rules, and they don't play like anybody else plays. They're playing their own game by their own rules, and they're not even on the same playground as everybody else.
Right. It feels like they don't really fit into these other categories because they don't. The druid class is based on real-life mythology from I want to say mostly the Celts. Someone's going to prove me wrong about that. But they were incorporated because they are such a big part of European mythology.
And history.
So they were implemented in as, I guess, close a way to that as possible, because they were really playing on the connection that they had to the supernatural by means of the natural.
And, speaking of guys who break the mold, who break the rules, who don't fit into anybody else's categories, there's those other guys. Those naturals. Those guys who hadn't had to work a day in their life to do all the stuff that everybody else is devoting their lives to. The guys who live however they want to live and don't listen to what no god says and no patron says. They're going to do their own thing, and they do it well because they them, They are the arcane jocks, the arcane jerks, the arcane lazy boys who can do magic just because they wanna and they felt like it today.
Sorcerers, baby!
I feel like you like sorcerers.
If no one can tell, I'm playing a sorcerer right now for the first time, and it's great. I'm a level 5 sorcerer who has subtle spell. My last combat, I'd spent the entire thing lying in the gutter, casting spells while everyone thought I was passed out drunk.
Just wait till you finally give bards a try.
It's great. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba, I'm loving it.
Sorcerers cast magic in a way that's different from everybody else because it is natural for them. Just like some of the monsters out there in D&D have innate spell casting, all sorceress casting is innate spell casting. They get an idea, they gotta get a feeling, they want something to happen, and they have the power to just make it happen.
They can do this because...
It's vulgar, it's obscene.
They can do this because they are so suffused with the magic that permeates everything else. They're practically made of this stuff, and it just exudes out of them. And it is second nature to them to manipulate this. They know magic like you know the back of your hand. For them to manipulate it is for you to whip your hair back and forth.
So even though they're using the same casting ability as the bard, who still has to study and practice hard to cast, they don't. And even though they are using verbal components and somatic components and material components just like the wizard is, they don't have to go through preparing their spells and studying up for the day. They just do what they want to do because they can. For a sorcerer, everything is innate. Magic is like breathing. They don't know what life is like without magic because they never had to live that way.
It's like being born into privilege, kind of. Like if you think of some sort of Dark Age caste system, it's like being born a noble. You were rich and you didn't have to work for it.
And you don't got to worry about it going anywhere. It's a part of you. You're going to be magic till you die.
And you're only going to get progressively more magical. Which is to say, you are suffused with magic the entire time, from birth to death. You are going to gain an increasing amount of control over this, and you're going to find new ways that you can manipulate this part of yourself. And that is going to come in the form of learning new spells, and that's going to come in the form of learning new meta magic options to change and reshape the spells that everyone else can do and surpass your limitations. Which I should say, surpass their limitations.
Yeah, magical puberty is going to be real tough. So that is kind of how all of the classes are expected to interact in the traditional Forgotten Realm settings. Is magic is everywhere.
Yep.
Bards and wizards learn how to interact with it through study.
Right. They take the building blocks of the gods and work hard to understand how they work so that they can use them themselves.
Druids commit themselves to unifying with nature, the weave included, and learn how to manipulate it to their own ends.
Become one with the building blocks.
And clerics and warlocks kind of take a shortcut and just get their divine magic and infernal magic from other people at the cost of being told how to live their lives.
Who cares about these building blocks? I can get my toys directly from the guy who made them.
And they're sorcerers, I guess.
I am the building blocks.
So, yes, that's kind of how it works in traditional Forgotten Realm settings if you're using magic as it's presented in the books. But you don't really have to do that if you don't want to.
Right. The weave is a good, pretty well thought out, although a little bit, shall we say, tropey or tried and true way of presenting magic that works great in D&D, but it's not the only way that you can do it.
Right. Oh, you know from playing in my campaign setting in Arrowlay that in my world, basically all magic is really divine magic. Just some of it is more direct than others. Clerics and paladins get magic the way that you would expect them to get magic, pretty much just as printed in the books. However, druids and bards in Rob World kind of are along the same lines of the entire world was created by divine magic, and a lot of it is still here. And we're going to commune with it and discover it and experience it, and then use what we have learned to interact with it in ways that make us happy or burn our enemies, one or the other.
Hey, that might make you happy.
Warlocks work about the same way. You pick someone that's got more power than you, serve them, and you get a hand-me-down. Wizards are the one class that doesn't follow these rules. Technically speaking, the gods themselves, who access all this divine power, are interacting with magic on its terms. They know how magic really works, and they have imparted it down to the world, and they used it to create, and they use it to interact with one another. Wizards are smart enough to have figured out these same methods on their own. They don't have to experience the magic of the gods. They can create it on their own. Not really creating it, but unlocking the latent energies that the gods themselves are using, because they're just that smart. That's why a lot of wizards in my world defy the gods or rival the gods, because they are trying to get on that level and trying to ascend to that height. Sorcerers in Rob World, meanwhile, are just special. They're blessed, or they're anomalies, who have an uncommon, perhaps even ungodly, amount of magic just within them. They are gods in the chrysalis. They have what others strive for just by virtue of existing, which makes them a bit of a target and a bit special. Sorcerers are less common in Rob World than perhaps in other settings, but they are very special when they crop up. And usually, these are the children of destiny. These are the ones that are going to go on to do great things just because they were destined to, and because they can't help but be special.
Guys, the campaign that I'm playing as a sorcerer in is actually Rob's, and I didn't realize all of this stuff when he didn't explain this to me. Please send help. Am I the first sorcerer who has been in Aralay, or have you had some others? Oh no, I've been 2 sorcerers in your campaigns.
In a one-shot, I had a sorcerer. Do you remember the Rakshasa Maharaja Aluhalim?
Yes, I remember the Rakshasa.
He was set loose upon the Volanti Isles by a black dragonborn sorceress who became indirectly responsible for the destruction of her whole race.
Like you do.
Like you do.
Yeah, I'm learning so much about my character without even meaning to. Well, I do like that in your campaign setting, a druid is technically a divine caster. In fact, I know that in a lot of campaign settings, and I think they even mention this in the book, that this is a possibility, druids get their powers from a connection to a nature deity, rather than just a connection to the forest and the ground itself.
The birds and the bees, and the flowers and the trees until you're up to your knees in love.
Right. Storms and the rivers and all of that stuff. I know that taking the approach of a druid being effectively a nature cleric with a little bit of rebranding is a very popular way, and it wouldn't bother me at all to be a druid in your campaign, although it might bother me to be a druid in general. Maybe one day I'll get over that hang-up.
I finally went out on a limb and I played a druid in your campaign. It was fun.
Yeah, you did. Didn't feel very druidy.
No, because I don't like the traditional flavor of druid is not really my bag. So anyway, that's how I'm doing it in Aralay, in my personal homebrew campaign setting.
Right, I dig it.
And at my suggestion and out of your own interest, I know that you've been playing around with the idea of your own personal setting. Have you thought at all about how magic works in that world?
I have. So this has been kind of a back burner afterthought for at least over a year now. But as a lot of world builders do, and probably a lot of DMs shouldn't, I started with the cosmology of my world, of how the planes are structured, how they interact with one another. And I inadvertently based my magic system around that in a way that is not altogether dissimilar from Magic the Gathering. Which I love, so I would also maybe like to say that I would have done that intentionally, but such was not the case. In this campaign setting, when it is done, the type of magic that you are able to cast will be inherently tied to your connection with a certain plane. So if you are attempting to cast some evocation magic, such as Fireball, then you are going to be tapping into the elemental plane of fire and unleashing a little bit of that chaotic, fiery energy into the world. If you attempt to cast Time Stop, then you're going to be tapping into the plane of law and order and imposing new rules upon reality that weren't there before. Or if you were to attempt some conjuration magic, you are going to be effectively pulling something from one plane into yours, which is pretty much exactly how it works in normal D&D, turns out. But I started designing the system before I actually read about all the different classes and the schools of magic and their connection to the weave and all that. But I kind of like that idea, which is why I'm going with it, of how the magic is inherently tied to the cosmology itself in a way that makes each different school of magic or each different implementation of magic a little unique. So instead of saying, I would like to make a fireball here and send it to there, you're saying, no, I would like to open a tiny portal to the elemental plane of fire right in the middle of all those bad guys. Just maybe that tiny little speck that is described in the spell block, instead of just expanding and becoming a giant fireball, you say, nope, that's all it takes to incinerate this radius in that kind of fire.
Gotcha. So, like, healing magic might come from the positive energy plane. The darkness spell would come from the Shadowfell, and such as that. Like, the energy is coming from a certain place, and it is consistent with the place that it comes from, but you can still tweak it, I imagine. You're not opening a portal to a place where fairy fire is and dropping fairy fire on people.
No.
But you're drawing the energy from that place and then toying with it.
Right, and we've established through previous episodes that I really like the flavor of certain things, and that I really like understanding myself and then maybe being able to gift my players with an understanding of exactly what you're doing when you cast this spell. People may remember that I really got into Counterspell that one time when we were talking about how to splash up your combats a little bit. That's the sort of thing that I enjoy, and that's the sort of thing that I want to do for players, and so basically just making that part of the world. You know, if you're doing something with necrotic energy, then it's coming from a plane that is suffused with necrotic energy. Or if you go about healing someone, then you're using a kind of divine magic and you're drawing it from the celestial plane. If you're using divination magic, then you're tapping into the unknown mysteries of the astral plane and using that limited interconnected potential to reveal to you secrets that you would otherwise not be privy to.
That's a neat idea. I can see where the Magic the Gathering inspiration came from, but it doesn't feel ripped off. Like, you've made it your own.
Right, and like I said, it's because the connection to Magic the Gathering has come about after the fact when I'm like, yeah, I'm going to tap the elemental plane and that's how I'm going to cast this spell. But it is not, it's not color-coded or anything like that. It's just an understanding that I enjoy having that I might be able to give to the players at some point of how the effects that they're trying to produce are impacted by the world as a whole.
All right, so kind of to close things out here, I thought we might play a little game.
Well, you know how I like games.
There are a lot of magical people out there in fiction, in comic books, in anime, in fantasy novels and movies. Why don't we pick some of those guys and try, based on the stuff that we've been discussing, and shoehorn them into a D&D class.
Doesn't that sound like fun?
It kind of does, and we've talked about a couple of these, and I know for a fact that we agree on some of them, and I know for a fact that we don't on others.
Mm-hmm.
So this could be interesting. I'll hear you out on some of your opinions.
Okay, let's go ahead and start with some that I consider kind of misnomers, if you will.
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of big ones out there.
What do you think of Mickey Mouse in The Sorcerer's Apprentice?
I specifically didn't use... I thought about Disney magicians, and I thought, Why on earth would I use Mickey?
Not in Kingdom Hearts now.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Gosh, I haven't seen Fantasia in probably at least 20 years. He gets his powers by putting on the Sorcerer's hat, and then operates with a modicum of control that he quickly loses. His spellcasting is not innate, so he can't be a sorcerer.
Correct.
He is not a druid because he's not. He is not a cleric because... Or is he a cleric? Am I going to say that he's a cleric? His power is coming from Yen Sid because he has...
Is it coming from Yen Sid?
I feel like the gimme answer would be that he's a wizard, but he has not studied much. He's watched Yen Sid do his thing. So maybe he is. I'm going to say wizard. I'm going to say that he was correctly branded.
So he was labeled as the Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Oh, is that it?
Is why I called this a misnomer.
Oh.
That's the name of the short.
20 years with no Fantasia, no regrets, but also a big miss.
I'm pretty sure I remember him referencing the wizard's spell book. But it's pretty clear that there is a cadence, there is a music to this scene of how the animated objects, which is, by the way, a bard and wizard spell, do their things. And he does quickly lose control, which means that he's not terribly good at the magic that he's casting, that he's under-leveled for it. But I think he's certainly an Arcane Caster, probably a wizard, possibly a bard.
Well, he doesn't learn from a spell book, but he does learn, and he does learn from watching someone who is proficient in it. I would probably say wizard, although because of that musical element that is inherent in Fantasia, I would, I guess, accept the bard answer as well.
So let's go for another misnomer, maybe. What about the Sorcerer Supreme, Dr. Stephen Strange?
Okay, for me, this one is actually really obvious. I was going to put this one to you and see what you thought about it. He is referred to in Marvel Comics as the most powerful wizard. He is known as the Sorcerer Supreme, but he's a warlock.
Do tell.
All of the spells that he uses are someone else's spells, and in a way that is kind of actually similar to D&D.
Like casting Mordenkainen's Magnificent Mansion and Bigby's Hand and Tensor's Floating Disc.
Right. And the items that he uses are also indicative of these other creatures. But that would make you think, well, he's probably a wizard, right?
Just with some really fancy magic items.
Yeah, but according to the Wikipedia article, which I read earlier today in order to pull this example, I know.
You prepped?
This is cheating, but I thought that I knew that he was going to be a misnomer, and I was going to give him to you. He is a practicing magician who draws his powers from mystical entities such as Agamotto, Icon, Sidorak, and some other guys like Watumb, who lend him their energies for his spells. If these were previous sorcerers and magicians whose spells he was replicating, then that would make him a wizard. But because these are living entities who are granting him this power, he's the best darn warlock in Marvel Comics.
I can see where you're coming from with that. I still may give him the wizard because I don't know of any pacting or arrangements or anything he's got to do for these guys in return for the magic. Maybe he's just a wizard with some really cool friends, but you make a convincing argument.
Well, he does have the Book of Vishanti, which is a grimoire, so he does have a spell book. So I will accept the wizard if that's the case that you want to make, but I'm giving him, for my money, he's a warlock because he is drawing his power from living entities, which I assume is contractual, which is why I'm not giving him cleric.
Whenever someone wants to take some of my energy, I do have them sign.
Okay, well, hey, how about I got one for you?
Sure.
I'm going to give you another misnomer, and to me this one's a big softball. Harry Potter.
Okay.
From the Wizarding World. The Wizarding World, Rob.
Harry Potter, I used him earlier as a wizard example because he studies hard, he's got the wand, he learns spells from books even though he doesn't carry one around with him. I know, though, that he was kind of special from birth.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he gets the letter from Hogwarts, is because he has magic and needs to learn how to properly control it. He is born with magical power. That's what separates him from the muggles, right?
Right. Maybe you're born with it, or maybe you're a muggle.
I'm thinking I'm remembering this right, because I'm not super well acquainted with the lore. Listeners, don't hate me. But I know he's got like a sliver of Voldemort in him, right? That's like part of the plot. And that makes him more special than the people around him. But at a base level, he's a sorcerer, right?
Yes. For my money, Harry Potter is absolutely a sorcerer. Everyone at Hogwarts was born with their power, and they are at Hogwarts in order to learn to cultivate it. Yes, Harry is more special than everybody else, but all of their power comes from within. There is no latent magical energy in the wizarding world because it is theoretically our world. We're the muggles recording a podcast, and Harry Potter is the wizard who was born with the ability to do something different. In fact, as the wizards become more proficient, they are able to cast their spells sans verbal and somatic components.
So this is why I kind of like this exercise, is because when you realize where the power is coming from and how you're supposed to interact with it, how long you've had it, and whether or not you can lose it, you start to be able to see these archetypes of fictional characters properly in the light of Dungeons & Dragons. And if you want to be a kid like Harry Potter, don't play a wizard. You're going about it the wrong way.
Which is a very useful way to go about things. Say, if you have a player, as I know that you recently did, who is trying out D&D for the first time and is interested in playing a magic user, and you're trying to put them into the niche where they will most enjoy playing, that is most in line with their expectations. Maybe they want to be a wizard like Harry Potter, but the wizard in D&D is not like a wizard in Harry Potter. They'd actually want to play a sorcerer.
Right. Our friend Amanda played a few sessions with us a little while ago. She played through the entirety of your campaign, and that was her first experience with Dungeons & Dragons, and she played a character with no magical ability. So when I started running for her and she wanted to give magic a try, I started asking her, all right, so where do you get your power from? How do you cast your spells? What do you expect to be able to do with magic? And asking her these questions, we wound up guiding her to the fact that she wanted to be a wizard. Someone who was not powerful in and of themselves, who had to work hard for it and wanted to be that driven, industrious kind of character. So, one of the reasons that we devote time to thinking about this and talking about this is for the benefit of people who don't come to the game with all the meta knowledge that we do. Because, you know what? We like this hobby. Maybe we want to explain it to our less nerdy friends and want to make it understandable and accessible to them. Okay, so that was fun. I enjoy making what I know about D&D useful in other contexts, even if it's not terribly useful in those contexts.
I mean, at the very least, this is an entertaining exercise, and it gets a lot easier, for my money, when you apply these different rules, this structure to these other characters. Because obviously, we could try to nitpick about, well, Gandalf can cast this spell, so that means he's this thing, or Harry Potter did this, that means he's that thing. In fact, there is a whole YouTube channel dedicated to how to make your favorite fantasy and comic book characters in D&D, and it's fun. But applying that sort of structure will definitely help us to kind of categorize them, and I imagine they go through a very similar process when they do that sort of thing. But what about you? Not you, Rob. The listeners, the important ones. Are there any characters out there that you would categorize as a D&D class? And is it a really obvious answer? Is it a very controversial answer? Because I want to hear some more of those.
Yeah, I've got a lot of examples that we didn't get to cover, Jadis, the White Witch from Narnia, Naruto from, Naruto. Tom Bombadil from Lord of the Rings, the Sanderson sisters from Hocus Pocus. We've got a Discord where we can discuss all this and more, and I would love to have a good-natured argument about this with you.
Naruto from those animes, right? He's probably the same class as Sasuke, isn't he?
Isn't he?
Or the Silver Surfer, or Green Lantern, Dr. Fate from DC Comics, Scarlet Witch. And someone tell me what Jafar is, because I couldn't land on that one.
I honestly think that one may change over the course of the movie.
So tell us your opinions on all of these things, or ask us ours, because on everyone but Jafar, I at least have one. So yes, please come on our Discord and tell me what class your favorite fantastic spellcaster falls into.
You can also berate us or congratulate us, agree or disagree with us on Twitter, where we are reachable at Twinspiration. And as always, I am reachable at D&D Wannabe on Twitter. And before we play that cool music, can I make an announcement? A thing I'm excited about? Can I do it? Can I say something? I want to do thing.
I think that's probably your prerogative as being, a good 50% of this show.
So, as I've said on previous episodes, I am a content creator for Dungeons & Dragons in my spare time. I occasionally contribute to Misty Mountain Gaming's Dungeon feed. I've written an adventure for them. I've been working on a supplement involving Norse mythology and how to implement it into your games. And just last week, the owner of Misty Mountain Gaming and I sat down for a talk, and I'm going to be working full-time, starting in a week and a half, doing Dungeons & Dragons as my living. And I'm so excited.
That sounds great. Yeah, you're taking your hobby that you're passionate about, that you're already devoting all of your free time to, and you're turning that into the time that is not free. You're turning that into your paid time. So unfortunately, that does mean that Rob will no longer have any time to work on the podcast. So it is at this point that we say goodbye to him and I become a solo act.
Yeah, you wish. I'm not letting you off that easy.
Damn it.
As a matter of fact, Misty Mountain Gaming is kind of a fan of what we do here, and they're going to be enabling me to produce this kind of content more often. We will be working in conjunction with them on taking this podcast forward. I'll also probably be streaming on Twitch and making YouTube videos and maybe TikToks. I don't know. It's still very new. Not all of the kinks have been ironed out, but I'm very excited for what's coming in the near future.
Yeah, I'm very excited about the Twitch thing. There are some very D&D-esque games that I know that you have played that will be great to go through with you. And there are some other games that have a lot that you could learn from that I think you haven't played that I would be so excited to introduce you to.
I'm just looking forward to all of it.
I'm just looking forward to you getting rid of that old job and doing something that you're going to enjoy.
And enjoy it I shall.
In all respects other than working with me.
Well, on that unusually pleasant note, we will leave you. We will be continuing to talk about magic in the next episode, breaking it down on more of a spell-by-spell level than these broad strokes, talking to you about different disciplines in magic, the wizarding schools.
That's right, we're taking you to school. We're going to start the next episode with classes in session.
All right, we'll hold you to that. Until then, I'm Rob.
And I'm Steven.
And we will catch you next time.
The outro music you're listening to right now is called Mega Epic, and the intro music is called Super Epic. Both were composed by the wonderfully talented Alexander Nakarada and utilized under a Creative Commons license. You can find more of his music at serpentsoundstudios.com. If you enjoyed our content, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and review on your listening app of choice. To keep up with us on social media, look us up on facebook.com/Bardic Twinspiration and on Twitter @BTwinspiration. Want to interact with us directly? Come join our Discord. After all, who are we if not people who are willing to roll the dice on making some new friends? Links in the description. Come check it out. Is there a magic-based pun we can make?
There's the Jim Dark magic. Have a magical day.
Have an enchanted evening.
All right, let's go ahead and stop recording.
You should put multiple bloopers after this episode. We have a bunch. At any rate, yes, we are going to be starting over.
6 of them are agreed upon as being primarily
Google Play Games.
6 of them are considered to be casting classes.